The Raptors lose another disgusting defensive effort. Scottie Barnes has 8 turnovers, and Bruce Brown makes his season debut. Let's go to the film room. Bruce Brown played 20 minutes in his first game this season, had 12 points, 3 rebounds, 1 assist, and 1 steal, and I thought he showed off a little bit of everything he can do for the Raptors. He's a great screener on the ball. Nice job slipping into space here and finishing. Really enjoy his defensive effort. Watch him hound DeAndre Hunter on the ball, forcing him to pick it up, and then the Raptors force a turnover, get out and running. This was a pretty sequence. Nice steal here, and then goes all the way for the finish and the dunk. Great transition player. Bruce Brown has historically been a really good transition player. Great in transition, but also good at handling the ball. And especially with Davion Mitchell and Emmanuel Quickley out at least for the next little bit, Bruce Brown will probably have a little bit of ball handling responsibilities here for the Raptors. Like I said, great at leaking out. Beautiful transition pass from Scottie, and he finishes. This is some of that ball handling that I was talking about. Pinned down into a DHO, just goes downhill, settles into a floater. And this is a really good sign for the Raptors. If he can hit those threes, not only is he really important to the team, but that trade value goes up. And I thought his defense in a game that there wasn't a lot of defense being played was pretty impressive. Great job here on Jalen Johnson and getting the stop. And so Bruce Brown showed off the full package in just 20 minutes of action. I thought he was probably one of the most effective players for the Raptors tonight in what was a really, really ugly game once again for the Toronto Raptors. Where do I even begin with this? Like, first of all, Bruce was good. Objectively was a pleasant surprise in a game that was really, really ugly. Obviously, there's going to be constant trade conversation around Bruce. Mark Stein had a report today that said, multiple second round picks for Bruce Brown, and he could be had from the Toronto Raptors. He also mentioned Kelly Olynyk in that deal, and I probably would be skeptical if the Raptors traded Kelly Olynyk. Wouldn't be surprised, but I'm just skeptical of the fact that they would trade Kelly Olynyk at this point. That being said, Bruce is going to be involved in trade rumors until February 6th. Like, that's just the natural thing with him and his contract and his situation with the Raptors. But admittedly, they could use what he has capability-wise and skill-wise over the next month and a half, especially as they deal with injuries to IQ, who was seen before the game shooting the ball, and Davion Mitchell, who has an illness. The Raptors are now almost fully healthy, which makes these losses, with this loss particularly, even worse because they got cooked defensively. They almost had a franchise record in turnovers, and they did it while having most of their roster except their 2-point guards. Maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe not having their lead ball handlers is a really big part of this overgrowing issue offensively. I'll get into that in a minute, but overall, I thought Bruce was a pleasant surprise, good addition to this team. Really curious to see how he'll fit into the rotation and how he kind of changes the pecking order for these young guys. Because realistically, if Bruce gets traded, and I would put it at pretty likely that Bruce Brown gets traded before this trade deadline. There's only 5 more weeks until the deadline. February 6th or 7th, I believe, is the trade deadline. It might be the 8th, but it's one of those days. And so there's only 5 weeks left. I would imagine, given that there's only 5 weeks left, he will get extended run to be showcased as much as possible for teams to be interested in his trade value, for contenders to be interested, for playoff teams. And that's just the nature of the NBA. That being said, I'm kind of curious how that changes things for the rookies. Jonathan Mobo didn't play a lot tonight. I believe he only played 6 minutes. Most of it was in, garbage time when the game was over. Jamison Battle only played 9 minutes. Obviously, his playing time changes. Jacoby Walter only played 14 minutes or 16 minutes in this one. So things change for some of the younger players on the Raptors, at least for the time being. And once Emmanuel Quickley comes back, once Davion Mitchell comes back, that just changes things even more. And so I'm very curious to see how the rotation looks like once all of these pieces come together, because I would imagine Davion Mitchell is only out with an illness. He'll be back in the next couple of days. Hopefully he's feeling well. Flu season going around, folks. Stay safe. Hopefully he gets better and he's back in the lineup within the next few games. And then Emmanuel Quickley, likely coming back. I can't even put a timetable on it. I had suggested to you guys, end of December. That obviously hasn't happened. He has progressed. How much more he needs to progress to get on the floor? Not sure, really. Elbows are really, really weird, and you got to kind of take your time with that one. And obviously they miss him. They really do miss him. I think more than anything, boy, does this team right now miss Emmanuel quickly because they need someone who can orchestrate the offense. Post game, a lot of these guys were saying that they think the team has hit a wall and they're tired. And, maybe that is an excuse. Maybe that isn't an excuse. I don't know. I'm not in the locker room. I'm not sure. Um, Admittedly, a lot of guys have been playing above their role with all of these injuries. You think about dating back to the start of the season with Scottie being out and IQ being out and RJ being out for a little bit, and then Grady going out, and then Jakob going out. And, we know this kind of shuffling of deck that the Raptors have had with these injuries. That has required guys to jump into bigger roles. And there's a benefit to that for a certain amount of time, right? But then there's a diminishing returns here once that becomes too much, right? And I think that's what's happening a little bit with the Raptors, where they are not executing, they are not playing well, and they are just not together right now. And I think for a lot of people, that brings up the question of coaching. It's like, why aren't the coaches getting more out of this roster? And we see that a lot in the NBA nowadays. We do, right? Mike Brown just got fired from the Sacramento Kings, right? And I don't think that the issue with the Sacramento Kings was Mike Brown. My big thing with Sacramento is that roster is flawed. They are not well constructed. They have way too many ball handlers. They don't have enough defenders. They don't have enough two-way players. And so that team was probably doomed to fail in a really, really competitive Western Conference, Mike Brown or no Mike Brown. And so I think people often give too much credit to coaches when teams do well. And I think people dock coaches way too much when teams don't do well. Sometimes it is just roster construction or teams not executing the game plan. Minnesota Timberwolves right now struggling, trying to figure out their identity, et cetera, et cetera. And their starting lineup isn't good. Like, their starting lineup does not win games for them. It's when they go to their bench and it's Naz Reid and Dante DiVincenzo, and they incorporate that, spacing offense next to Anthony Edwards, is when things really blossom. Is that a coaching issue or is that a roster issue? That is something that I think a lot of NBA fans struggle to grasp, because yes, you could say Chris Finch should change the starting lineup. Absolutely. But at the same time, Julius Randle is not going to come off of the bench. So is that a roster construction problem or is that a coaching problem? And so I think for the most part, bad coaches really get exacerbated in the NBA. Jim Boylan, Chicago Bulls, was a bad coach, and there were tons of stories around that because he was such an example of being a bad coach. But then you look at like Mark Daigneault, you look at Eric Spoelstra, guys who are exemplary coaches in the NBA, and they are highlighted so much because of how above the cut they are in their profession. Most of the time, though, a lot of these head coaches are good. And I think it's really, really hard to pin any of this on Darko Rajakovic when it's mostly the team has been injured, the team is not executing, the team does not have the defensive construction roster-wise to be able to execute. Does that mean that they should be conceding 155 points? No. Does that mean they should be conceding 136 like they did tonight, or 430 over their last 3 games combined, which is the most the team has given up since 1991? Does that excuse that? No, it doesn't. And I think if you even ask Coach Darko Rajakovic, he would agree with you. He would say that he needs to prep the game better. He needs to prep the team better. He needs them executing more. People bring up ideas of buy-in and, maybe he needs to get on the players more often. Again, I'm not privy to that, so I don't know, right? Not a lot of people know. And so I think that is why I get annoyed with coaching conversations and officiating conversations, because it is a black box for you to say, I don't like that. I don't like what he's doing, so that's the reason this is happening. I don't like that call, and that's the reason we lost, because they missed that foul call or they called that foul. It just is ambiguous, and it's not productive to talk about coaching or officiating, in my opinion. We can look at coaching on the grand scheme of things, and as a guy who watches a shit ton of basketball and a shit ton of film. It irks me because I see that 99% of NBA teams run the same things. They play the same defensive style. It is a copycat league through and through. Most teams run the exact same thing, with the exception of a few teams. Most teams run the exact same things. And so to blame it on coaching is blaming it on something bigger than what you might believe is actually happening on the court. That's my opinion on things. Yes, there are things like buy-in. Yes, there are things like execution. Yes, there are things like listening to your coach and all that type of stuff. I've played basketball before. There are people who are much better at basketball than me who could probably attest to this. Yeah, listening to your coach is a huge part of coaching. Do I think that is the case with this Toronto Raptors team? I do not. I do not think it is a buy-in thing. I do not think it's like a unpreparedness from the coaching staff thing. I think there are some, between the injuries, between this being a young and rebuilding team, there's just not a lot there for them to be able to stack up wins. Should they be 7-25? No, they've lost a couple of close games that they probably should have won because of injuries. Should they be giving up this many points on the defensive end? No, they need to execute better and be prepared for their game plan, and also lock in earlier in games. But I think one of the things that I've seen outside of the coaching is this conversation around Scottie Barnes. And by the way, please feel free to comment about the coaching stuff. I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say. Samson tweeted about it earlier. Me and him were having a discussion about it earlier too, and it was kind of jarring to us that like the immediate thing was people went to coaching instead of just being like, well, this team is injured, this team is not that good, and this team is still working through the kinks of what they want to be. And also, their star player is trying to figure out who he wants to be. Scottie Barnes had 8 turnovers tonight, and you guys saw the recap against Memphis. I talked to you about how I thought that was his best game since returning from injury. This was the opposite of that. I don't think this was a good game at all from Scottie. We saw some flashes offensively as a scorer, getting into the mid-post area, but the turnovers and the playmaking was a huge issue. And I think a lot of people, by the way, preface all of this with the fact that he's coming back from an ankle injury, dealing with apparently a hip injury as well. And so a lot of this limits maybe his effectiveness on the floor. I think he's been bad defensively since returning from injury too. So maybe this is part of that. Maybe it is. Really, it is. But ultimately, like the Scottie who came back after the eye injury and was playing in that stretch with the mask was just incredible. Right? I think it was probably the best basketball he played. Was looking like an all-star level player on both ends of the floor. Great defensively, active, great length. I broke it down on here multiple times. The offensive stuff, the playmaking, the different schemes that he was trying to attack. But he still is a player that is trying to figure it out. Scottie, this is year one of him as the number one option on the team. And he's been injured. He hasn't had the opportunity of playing it out through multiple games like an RJ has or like a Grady Dick has. And so it's kind of like playing catch up with certain situations. And I want to break down some of these turnovers and some of these plays. Really love this creation from Scottie in the post short range area, settling for these mid-range jump shots, using his body to bounce off of them. But this is a tough turnover, so he recognizes the slip, tries to throw it over the defense, but telegraphs the pass to the help. And so this is just not reading the play right? In motion, rejects the pick and roll, goes all the way and finishes through contact. Ball handling needs to develop, and that's a part of his game. Just gets the ball poked out from Jalen Johnson. But this was a really nice play, mid-post area, uses the bumps Jalen Johnson off his spot, finishes in the mid-range area. Tough turnover here, tries to bump and see in the mid-range area, but just throws a bad pass, doesn't read the passing lane well. And this is surprising stuff because Scottie is known for his passing ability, right? So I do think it's a consistency thing. It's like finding when to pick and choose his spots versus finding when to find his teammates. And also figuring out how he can be aggressive and attack the rim, but also find the three-point shot and establish his jumper. It's a lot to do for a player on the offensive end. Love this play where he just kind of does that turnaround jumper. He's gotten used to that. That's been a pattern of his now. And so I thought Scottie was not that good offensively tonight. I know he had some really good moments in that short range area. Perhaps that opens up things for him on the offensive end. It's really important for him to develop that mid-range craft when it comes to playoff time and when it comes to this team playing important games, because as teams take away the inside from him and wall him off, and as teams continue to run him off the line as a three-point shooter, especially off the catch, being able to develop a mid-range shot is what all the best superstars do. You think of Shea, you think of Luka, you think of Tatum, you think of Jokic, you think of Embiid, you think of all the best, Kevin Durant, right? You literally could go down the list of the top 10 players in the NBA, and all of them, most of them, have a mid-range package. Even Giannis this year is a mid-range specialist, and he's knocking down a career high in the mid-range shot. So developing that is really, really important for Scottie's ceiling because it's shot creation. And I think that aspect is really good. Check. Offense, great. Scoring, cool. He's developing. He's figuring it out. He's trying to figure out when to pick and choose his spots. He's trying to figure out when to get to the basket and attack. He's trying to figure out when to shoot that pull-up shot. So all of this is going to take time. That is why the Raptors are in a rebuild. And I had a few comments in my Twitter saying, well, man, it's year 4 for Scottie. It really isn't year 4. Yes, it is year 4 of his career, but it's year 1 of him as the number 1 guy on a team. Before that, he had Pascal Siakam to play off of. He had Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet to play off of. Now he is the scouting report. Right? Everything is keyed towards stopping this dude. And so that changes the calculus for a player. It also changes the calculus for a coaching staff, which has to figure out how to maximize Scottie. But I do think like he is working through the kinks of what kind of player and what kind of star he wants to be. And so I think you need to afford him a little bit of grace as he works through the motions of that. Does he need to be better? Absolutely. But you also need to have time to be able to work out the kinks of that stuff. Scottie is a really good player. We've seen that for very, very long stretches. And I have confidence that that player will rejoin the Toronto Raptors eventually. Right now, he's working through the kinks of what it means to be that type of player while also experimenting a little bit. You can tell in games when he's trying to figure out, hey, maybe can I try to like take 10 threes in this game? Hey, can I like maybe just work in the mid-range area? Okay, let me try to get to the post. Okay, let me try to be a screener. He did that against Memphis a lot in that second half. Let me be a screener. Let me see what works here. So working through the kinks of things is what Scottie is doing right now. And I just need people to have a little bit more grace with that. The team is not good right now. And the team getting more healthy, I think, is an interesting equation to this, because I remember when way back, probably near the start of the season, I brought it up on YouTube and I was like, man, kind of interested to see once this team gets healthy, because I'm curious how that will impact the rest of this roster and what the trickle down effect will be in terms of like guys getting acclimated to one another, because they haven't played with each other that often. And 31 turnovers is the result of that. They haven't played with each other that often. And so I think there needs to be a little bit of time for them to figure it out, as well as the injuries and as well as them reportedly being tired and not being locked in and all that type of stuff. I think it's important, but more than anything, this is a team that is just trying to figure out what it is. I also think that applies to the coach. This coach is also trying to figure out what kind of coach he wants to be. And so I think people need a little bit more grace when it comes to this rebuild and just accepting the fact that, like, you're in it for the ride here. This game is the bad of it. We've seen the good of it. We've seen what the good of the rebuild can be for the Toronto Raptors. It's hard to remind yourself of that when they're 7-25. There's been much more bad than good. But at the same time, this is what the Raptors have signed up for. A rebuild. Potentially a long one. And sometimes you might not even see yourself out of a rebuild. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here, but we've seen that in instances before where teams get stuck in that because they're not able to get out of that. And so you have to be, especially, as you start to lose and build up losses, you have to be careful of that. And I think that part is on coaching to keep the players locked in, to keep the players bought into a system, to keep the players bought into winning and playing hard. And that part is on coaching. Yeah, that's all I got for y'all. I don't know. Just wanted to spiel a little bit. Thank you very much, y'all. Comment, subscribe, do all the things you guys do for Raptors Republic. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this stuff. A lot. I talked a lot in this one about coaching, about Scottie, about all that stuff. Curious to hear your thoughts. But yes, as always, like, comment, subscribe, do the things you guys usually do. Appreciate you guys, by the way. We got to 12,000 subscribers before the new year. Thank you guys for doing that. And as always, we will see you guys for the next game, Boston, on New Year's Eve. Take care.